I grew up in Toronto, and that's where I have a lot of memories. My friends and I would spend our time exploring, and we would go hunting butterflies, collecting snakes and frogs and things like that. There was something about the natural environment that drew me towards it. We had annual vacations to Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and we'd collect clams and shrimp and polychaete worms and things like that. So exposure to the ocean and lots of Jacques Cousteau specials on TV.
The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau.
Those all had an impact on my decision and desire to become a marine biologist or an oceanographer. So my path has been quite a long one, both geographically and time. So I entered the University of Toronto and majored in biology. I was in the Canadian Armed Forces in the reserves. It was also something that I loved. But the thing that really kept my focus was biology, not the military. I was born in South Africa, in Durban. So after I graduated, I started as a graduate student at the University of Natal. My project was studying a plant called Phragmites australis, the common reed. But I realized that my heart wasn't in working on plants. But while I was finishing this work, I went up to this really cool place called St. Lucia, and we would sample for shrimp larvae. I finally found this thing that I really was interested in. And I found this guy at Texas A&M, a professor named David Aldrich, who worked on shrimp, and I started doing research on Penaeid shrimp there. I published some papers on that, finished my Ph.D., and I started looking at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, WHOI as they call it. They were moving beyond traditional nets, and they built this underwater microscope. And it was basically a video camera with macro lenses. So I moved up to Massachusetts, back where I'd been as a kid, and I was a postdoc at WHOI. And I really developed a skill set and an interest in these camera systems. I was there for several years, and there was an opportunity in Louisiana to do a postdoc with a scientist down at LSU whose work I had read. I applied for this postdoc. I wound up getting a faculty position, and I'm still here at LSU over 25 years later. I had a chance to go out in the Gulf of Mexico on one of our ships with my class from LSU, my undergraduates, and nobody had really started looking at microplastics in the Gulf of Mexico. I had cameras, I had scanners to do basically a scan of a plankton sample. There was a lot of plastic in our samples. It was the first data on microplastics in the Gulf of Mexico. We were in the plume of the Mississippi River, so we figured it was probably coming down the Mississippi. We sampled between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and what we found were very, very high concentrations of microplastics in the Mississippi. And so I started looking around the area I lived in, Baton Rouge, and there was plastic all over the place. It was macroplastic, it was microplastic. And of course, in a watershed, any plastic and other debris starts its journey to the ocean. What happens to plastic over time is these plasticizers break down when they're exposed to ultraviolet light and oxygen. It breaks into smaller and smaller pieces, the same size as the natural food of small fish and invertebrates. And in about 60 days, they start to be colonized by bacteria and fungi that are attractive to aquatic animals. So these little fish start feeding on the microplastics. It gets eaten by a bigger fish. Who eats bigger fish? Well, some of the big fish people eat. They're carrying toxins that are entering our own bodies, and they can interfere with growth hormones, with sex hormones, can affect reproductive health, and affect our overall health in ways that we still don't really understand. We need mechanisms to keep this stuff out of our waterways. Ultimately, it requires that we stop using plastics to the degree that we do. Plastics make modern life convenient, but we don't need single-use plastics that we interact with for a matter of seconds to minutes. Those things are under our control. I mean, there are just so many great opportunities out there. How do we reduce our reliance on plastic? How do we encourage recycling? How do we make biodegradable polymers? And the people who are going to solve these problems are not going to be my generation. I've worked with undergraduate students. I know how talented you are, how passionate you can be about the environment. Get involved with like-minded people. Get involved with environmental organizations on campus. I'm pretty optimistic that you're going to make an impact and make a big change.